The alarm on Mark's phone went off at 5:45 a.m. It didn't ring with an aggressive chime. It buzzed with a low, persistent vibration against the wooden nightstand. Mark opened his eyes to the gray, diluted light filtering through the bedroom blinds. Beside him, Sarah was already gone. The left side of the bed was cold, the duvet neatly folded back. At 42, Mark's mornings were not a transition from sleep to awareness. They were a sudden deployment into routine. By 6:15 a.m., the house was a hive of quiet, frantic activity. Downstairs, the kitchen smelled of dark roast coffee and toasted whole wheat bread. Sarah was at the island, her laptop open next to a stack of permission slips, typing an email with her right hand while stirring oatmeal with her left. "Toby needs $10 for the Science Museum," Sarah said without looking up from her screen as Mark entered. Her voice was flat, efficient, calibrated by years of multitasking. "And Hannah's band practice has moved to 4 today, not 5. Can you handle the pickup?" "I have a meeting with the city planning committee at 4, Mark said, pouring coffee into a travel mug. He paused, looking at Sarah's profile. Her hair was pulled back into a hasty clip, faint dark circles carved under her eyes. "Can we swap? I can take Sam to the pediatrician tomorrow morning instead." "Fine," she said, finally looking at him. Her expression was neutral, polite, and completely devoid of warmth. "I'll adjust the shared calendar." That was their life. They didn't argue. They didn't shout. They ran a tight, functional ship. Together they raised 4 children, Hannah, 14 and growing distant behind her noise-canceling headphones. Toby, 11, whose entire world revolved around youth soccer. Maya, 7, a quiet girl who spent hours drawing in her room. And Sam, 3, a whirlwind of energy who still woke up twice a night. Mark walked out to a station wagon at 7:15 a.m. As he pulled out of the driveway, looking in his rearview mirror at the quiet suburban street, a familiar feeling washed over him, a suffocating sense that his life was completely written, bound, and published. Every hour of his week belonged to someone else, to his supervisor, to his clients, to his children, or to the maintenance of the house. Mark the man had disappeared. Only Mark the provider remained. The civil engineering office, where Mark worked as a senior coordinator, was quiet at 8 a.m. It was a space of fluorescent lights, blue carpet tiles, and the steady hum of computer fans. Chloe had joined the firm in late February as a junior intern. She was 21, in her final year of an urban planning degree at the state college nearby. She was bright, unburdened by mortgage payments or school district boundaries, and possessed an easy, effortless laugh that echoed in the quiet hallways. At first, their interactions were strictly professional. Mark was assigned as her supervisor for a Greenway expansion project. "Mark, do you have 5 minutes?" Chloe asked one morning in early spring, standing in the doorway of his office. She was holding a rolled-up set of site plans and 2 cups of coffee from the cafe down the street. "I can't get the drainage calculations to align with the city code for Section B." "Sure, come in," Mark said, clearing a space on his cluttered desk. She sat in the chair across from him. Unlike his colleagues, who brought stress into every meeting, Chloe brought an unspoken lightness. When Mark explained the municipal bypass codes, she listened with genuine admiration. To her, Mark was a veteran who navigated complex bureaucratic systems with calm authority. He wasn't a tired father struggling with laundry schedules. He was an expert, a mentor, an anchor. "You really know everything about this city, don't you?" Chloe said, leaning back and smiling. "I've been drawing these roads for 15 years, Mark replied, He felt a small, unfamiliar ping of pride. You get to know where the cracks are. Must be nice to feel so in control, she said softly. The shift happened so gradually that Mark couldn't pinpoint the exact day the line was crossed. It began with extended lunch breaks at a quiet diner 3 blocks away from the office, away from the usual spots frequented by staff. They talked about architecture, then about old movies, then about photography, a passion Mark had abandoned a decade ago when Hannah was born. For the first time in 10 years, Mark was speaking to someone who was interested in his thoughts rather than his availability. Chloe didn't need him to repair a sink, sign a check, or mediate an argument between siblings. She simply enjoyed his company. And Mark, blinded by the sudden surge of validation, mistook that simple enjoyment for something deeper. By May, the relationship was no longer innocent. It took place in brief, carefully calculated windows of time. A quiet hotel off Route 9 on Tuesday afternoons under the pretense of field surveys. Half-hour meetings in the back of Chloe's small hatchback in the far corner of the industrial park parking lot. In romantic fiction, infidelity is portrayed as a passionate, intoxicating adventure. In reality, Mark found it to be an exhausting exercise in logistics and psychological division. To maintain an affair with 4 children at home requires an immense amount of mental energy. He had to remember which version of his day he had told Sarah. He had to check his clothes for long, light brown hairs before stepping through his own front door. He turned off all lock screen notifications on his phone, hiding messaging apps inside administrative folders labeled Utilities. He washed his hands repeatedly with plain bar soap at work to scrub away the faint scent of Chloe's vanilla perfume before driving home. One Tuesday evening in June, Mark sat at his kitchen table. Sam was sitting on his lap, sticky fingers clutching a plastic dinosaur, while Maya showed him her math worksheet. Across the room, Sarah was folding a mountain of laundry, her face tired, her shoulders sloped with exhaustion. You look tired today, Mark, Sarah said, not looking up as she folded a pair of Toby's soccer shorts. Was the site visit long? Yeah, Mark said, his throat dry. Traffic on the bypass was terrible. He looked down at Maya's worksheet, pointing out a simple addition error. The guilt didn't hit him as a sharp spike of terror. It was a dull, persistent ache in his stomach. He was sitting in his own home, surrounded by the people who relied on him completely, feeling like an imposter in his own life. When he looked at Sarah, he felt a profound sense of shame, not because he had fallen out of love with her, but because he realized he was stealing her partner's presence from her. While she bore the full weight of their shared reality, he was escaping into an easy, artificial sanctuary. The illusion broke on a humid Thursday evening in mid-July. Chloe had invited Mark to meet her after work at a pub near the university campus. It was her friend's birthday, and she wanted Mark to join them for a drink. Mark had initially hesitated. It was risky, but Chloe had been persistent, teasing him about being too predictable. He told Sarah he had an emergency client meeting that would run late. The pub was loud, warm, and smelled of cheap draft beer and fried food. Pop music blasted from speakers hanging in the corners. Mark stood near the bar in his crisp linen button-down shirt and leather work shoes, feeling absurdly out of place among crowds of 20-something students in t-shirts and shorts. Chloe waved at him from a corner booth. When he walked over, she introduced him to 3 of her classmates. "This is Mark," Chloe said brightly, resting a hand briefly on his forearm. "He's the senior project lead I told you about." The students were polite, nodding and making space for him, but the conversation immediately moved back to their world. upcoming final exams, cheap summer road trips, housing leases, and campus drama. Mark sat quietly, sipping a light beer. He looked at Chloe as she laughed loudly at a story her friend was telling about a failed weekend trip to the beach. In the harsh neon light of the pub, the 20-year age gap between them wasn't a romantic detail. It was an ocean. Chloe turned to him, leaning in. "Are you okay? You're very quiet tonight." "I'm fine," Mark said, forcing a smile. "Just a long day." "You work too hard," she said, running her fingers casually along the edge of his sleeve. "You need to learn how to relax." Mark looked at her young, unlined face, and for the first time, he saw the situation clearly. Chloe wasn't a soulmate. She was a young woman enjoying the thrill of a secret connection with an older, established man. And he was a middle-aged father having a midlife crisis, using her youth as a bandage for his own burnout. He didn't belong in this pub. He belonged in a quiet kitchen, helping his 11-year-old figure out fractions, or standing in a backyard holding a garden hose. "I have to go, Chloe," Mark said, sliding out of the booth. "Now? It's only 8:30, she said, surprised. "I have things I need to take care of at home," he said softly. He left enough cash on the table to cover her group's tab and walked out into the humid summer night. There was no dramatic storm that night, no sudden confession in the pouring rain. The truth emerged with quiet, terrifying simplicity 3 days later. It was a lazy Sunday afternoon. The kids were scattered around the house, Hannah in her room, the boys playing a video game in the basement, and Sam taking a nap upstairs. Mark was sitting on the living room floor, helping Maya fit together the perimeter of a large jigsaw puzzle. His phone was resting on the coffee table behind him. He had forgotten to turn off the sound after returning from a grocery run. A single chime rang out. Mark reached for the phone, but Sarah, who was sitting on the sofa folding towels, reached it first to hand it to him. As she lifted the device, the screen illuminated. It was a preview of an unread text message from an unsaved number, but the text preview was fully visible. "Hey, Mark, you left your sunglasses in my car on Thursday after the pub. Do you want me to bring them to the office tomorrow morning? Chloe." The silence in the room became absolute. The ambient sounds of the house, the distant hum of the refrigerator, the faint sound of video game explosions from the basement seemed to drop away completely. Sarah didn't drop the phone. She didn't scream. She slowly lowered her hand and read the words again. Then she looked down at Mark, who was sitting on the rug with a puzzle piece still in his hand. Mark's chest tightened so hard he couldn't draw a full breath. He opened his mouth to say something, an excuse, a lie, a rationalization. But when he looked into Sarah's eyes, the words died in his throat. Sarah's face wasn't filled with rage. It was filled with a deep, crushing exhaustion. She looked at him not as a betrayed lover in a drama, but as a partner who had just realized that the foundation of her entire life was built on unstable ground. "Maya," Sarah said. Her voice was remarkably steady, though thin. "Go downstairs and play with your brothers for a few minutes, please." Maya looked between her parents, sensing the sudden shift in the air. She gathered her colored pencils without a word and ran down the stairs. Once the door closed, Sarah sat down in the armchair across from Mark. She set the phone gently on the table between them. "How long?" she asked. Mark swallowed hard. "Sarah, How long, Mark?" "Since April," he whispered. Sarah nodded slowly, her eyes fixed on the floor between them. She began processing the months, the late site visits, the extra working hours, the subtle emotional absence she had attributed to stress. "Is it over?" she asked. "Yes," Mark said, his voice breaking. "It was over before today. I swear to you, Sarah, it was a mistake. A horrific, selfish mistake." "Don't call it a mistake," Sarah interrupted, her voice dropping to a whisper, though it carried more force than a shout. "A mistake is dropping a plate. A mistake is missing a turn on the highway. You made dozens of choices every single day for 3 months. You looked at me every morning. You watched me run this home. You watched me take care of our children. And you chose to lie to me every single day." Mark couldn't answer. The truth of her words was absolute, leaving him no room to defend himself. "I need you to leave for the evening," Sarah said quietly, standing up. "Take your car, go for a drive, stay at a hotel. I need to think before the kids come back upstairs." "Sarah, please." "Go, Mark." Mark spent that night in a cheap motel near the interstate. He didn't sleep. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the muted television screen, realizing the true cost of what he had done. He hadn't destroyed his marriage in a burst of passion. He had slowly chipped away at the foundation of his family for a few hours of artificial escape. The next morning, he met Chloe before office hours at a quiet coffee shop. He kept it brief. He told her the affair was completely over, that his family was on the verge of destruction, and that he was requesting a transfer to a different regional project so they wouldn't have to work together. Chloe was upset and tearful, but she understood. 2 weeks later, her internship ended, and she returned to her university full-time. The real work and the real punishment happened at home. Sarah did not ask for a divorce immediately. Practically and emotionally, with 4 children, a sudden separation was a catastrophic prospect for both of them. But the marriage, as it had existed, was dead. Mark returned home on Monday afternoon. Sarah laid down clear, unyielding boundaries, complete transparency. Mark handed over his phone passwords, email access, and location data without argument. Counseling. They began attending marital therapy every Wednesday evening. Total accountability. Every late hour at work had to be verified. The months that followed were the hardest of Mark's life. The atmosphere in the house was cold and functional. For a long time, Sarah spoke to him only about domestic necessities, bills, kids' schedules, groceries. In therapy, Mark had to strip away his self-pity and examine the ugly truth of his actions. He hadn't cheated because his wife didn't care about him. He had cheated because he was unwilling to communicate his own burnout, preferring the easy validation of a stranger over the hard work of maintaining a long-term partnership. Rebuilding trust was not a matter of flowers, apologies, or grand gestures. It was a slow, painful crawl measured in months and years. It was Mark showing up every single day, being present, carrying his share of the domestic weight without complaining, and accepting Sarah's coldness without resentment. A year later, on a cool autumn evening, Mark was standing in the kitchen, washing the dinner dishes. The house was full of its usual noise. Toby playing guitar in his room, Hannah talking on the phone, Sam laughing in the living room. Sarah walked into the kitchen, holding 2 empty mugs. She set them in the sink beside him. She stood there for a moment, watching him work. She didn't smile, and the scars of the past year were still visible in her eyes. But then, she reached out and briefly touched his wrist, a small, quiet gesture that lasted no more than 2 seconds. "Thanks for fixing Maya's bike today," she said softly. "Any time," Mark replied. She walked out of the kitchen. Mark turned off the faucet and looked at his hands, dripping with water. There were no shortcuts, no easy, happy endings, and the trust they once had would never be entirely the same. But as he looked around at the messy, noisy, complicated house, Mark knew he was finally where he belonged, facing reality instead of running away from it.